America, a land of dreams, a beacon of hope for many around the world, the land of the free, home of the brave, a country built on the ideals of liberty and justice for all. But what if, instead of being united, America was at war with itself? What if the very fabric of our nation began to tear apart? It sounds crazy, right? Like something out of a movie. A dystopian nightmare that we could never imagine happening in real life. But some people worry that America is more divided than ever. Political tensions, social unrest, and economic disparities have created deep rifts. So divided that it could lead to another civil war. A conflict not just of ideologies, but of neighbors, friends, and families. Now, before you start digging a bunker in your backyard, let's be clear. A second American Civil War is very unlikely. But it's not impossible. History has shown us that even the most stable societies can fall into chaos. And sometimes thinking about the worst-case scenario can help us avoid it. By understanding the potential triggers and flashpoints, we can work towards preventing them. So what if it did happen? What if the unthinkable became reality? What if Americans really did start fighting each other again? What would be the spark that ignites such a conflict? What would that look like? Who would fight whom? And who would win? These are scary questions. Questions that force us to confront our deepest fears about our society, but they're questions worth asking, because by asking them, we can start to find answers. Answers that might help us steer away from the brink. Because the best way to prevent a war is to understand how it might happen in the first place, to recognize the signs of division and work towards healing them. Let's dive into this terrifying hypothetical. But remember, folks, this is all pretend. A thought experiment to help us understand the importance of unity and peace. The point isn't to glorify violence, but to understand how to prevent it. To remind ourselves that the strength of our nation lies in our ability to come together, even in the face of our differences. By fostering dialogue, promoting understanding, and working towards common goals, we can ensure that the idea of a second civil war remains just that, an idea, and not a reality. So let's take this journey together, and explore how we can build a future where unity prevails over division, and peace triumphs over conflict. Imagine a country where people can't agree on anything. A place where every conversation feels like a battleground. Not on politics, not on religion, not even on what to have for dinner. The simplest decisions become points of contention. That's America today, at least according to some very loud voices. Voices that seem to drown out any possibility of common ground. You've got your left and your right. Each side convinced they hold the moral high ground. Your liberals and your conservatives. Each group entrenched in their own beliefs, unwilling to budge. Your city folk and your country folk. Different lifestyles, different values, and often different realities. And they're all yelling at each other, online and in real life. Social media amplifies every disagreement, turning minor spats into major conflicts. Now disagreeing is fine, healthy even. It's called democracy, a system built on the idea that through debate we can find better solutions. But what happens when disagreements turn into anger? When the goal shifts from understanding to winning at all costs? When anger turns into hate? When we start seeing those who disagree with us not just as opponents but as enemies? And when hate turns into violence? When words are no longer enough and people feel compelled to act out their frustrations physically? That's when things get really scary. Because violence begets more violence, creating a cycle that's hard to break. Because when a country is this divided, all it takes is a spark to ignite a firestorm. A single event can set off a chain reaction. Maybe it's a controversial election. One side feels cheated, the other feels vindicated, and neither is willing to back down. Maybe it's a Supreme Court decision, a ruling that one group sees as a victory for justice, and another sees as a grave injustice. Maybe it's just one too many angry tweets. Social media outrage can quickly spill over into real-world actions. Whatever the trigger, the result is the same. Americans taking up arms against other Americans. Neighbors turning on neighbors, friends becoming foes. History has shown us that internal conflict can be devastating. The Civil War, for example, tore the nation apart and left scars that are still felt today. But history also shows us that we can overcome division. In times of crisis, Americans have come together, finding strength in unity. The key is to remember that despite our differences, we share a common goal, a better future for all. It's not about winning or losing, but about finding a way forward together. So why would Americans fight? Because they care deeply about their beliefs and their country. But caring deeply doesn't have to mean tearing each other apart. It can mean engaging in meaningful dialogue, seeking to understand rather than to dominate. It can mean finding common ground, even when it seems impossible. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. And the only way forward is together. So let's choose unity over division, understanding over anger, and peace over violence. For the sake of our future and for the sake of America. We all know the maps, red states and blue states representing Republicans and Democrats. But in a civil war, would these lines really hold? It's tempting to think of a clean split, the coasts versus the heartland, cities against the countryside. But the reality is far messier and more complicated. You've got conservatives in California and liberals in Texas. You've got cities with rural values and countryside areas with diverse populations. The battle lines in a modern American Civil War wouldn't be drawn on a map, but on something much more complex: ideology, identity, and access to resources. War is hell, but it's also expensive. The costs of military equipment, personnel, and logistics can drain a nation's resources at an alarming rate. And a second American Civil War would be an economic disaster of epic proportions. The financial stability of the entire nation would be at risk, leading to a cascade of economic failures. Think about it. No more trading between states, factories shut down, supply chains broken. The intricate web of commerce that keeps the economy running would be torn apart. The dollar plummeting faster than a pigeon fleeing a hot dog cart. The value of the currency would nosedive, causing inflation to skyrocket and making everyday goods unaffordable. And who suffers the most? Ordinary Americans. The people who work hard every day to make ends meet would find themselves in dire straits. The people who rely on a functioning economy to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. Families would struggle to afford basic necessities, leading to increased poverty and homelessness. War is bad for business. Small businesses, the backbone of the American economy, would be hit the hardest. Many would be forced to close their doors permanently. And in a country as interconnected as America, economic collapse would be a weapon wielded by both sides, hurting everyone in the process. The ripple effects would be felt across the globe, affecting international markets and economies. The global economy is intricately linked, and a civil war in America would send shockwaves through international trade. Countries that rely on American goods and services would face shortages and economic downturns. Beyond the economic implications, a civil war would also lead to a humanitarian crisis. Millions of people would be displaced, seeking refuge from the conflict, further straining resources and infrastructure. Rebuilding after such a conflict would take years, if not decades. The economic scars would be deep and the road to recovery long and arduous. The cost of reconstruction would add another layer of financial burden. Yet amidst the chaos, there is always hope. Communities would come together to rebuild and support one another, showcasing the resilience and strength of the human spirit. But the question remains, is it worth the cost?